My parents tried to pay for therapy to fix me because I wanted to marry my boyfriend in a wheelchair. So I moved across the country. I, 26F, guess I should start from the beginning. I met Bruce, 28 Matt, a tech conference 2 years ago where we were both representing our companies. I work as a software developer at a major tech firm, and Bruce was there showcasing his team's new accessibility software. He immediately caught my attention with his presentation. He was confident, articulate, and clearly brilliant at what he did. The fact that he was in a wheelchair didn't even register to me until later. We ended up talking during the lunch break, and I was impressed by how easy it was to connect. With him, he had this great sense of humor and could talk about anything. From coding to classic movies, we exchanged numbers, and he asked me out for coffee. The next day, that coffee date turned into dinner, and before I knew it, we were seeing each other regularly. Bruce had been in a wheelchair since he was 19. He was driving home from college for spring break when a drunk driver hit his cart. The accident left him paralyzed from the waist down, but he never let it stop him. He finished his degree, got into tech, and now makes more money than I do. As a senior developer at his company, he's the most determined and positive person I've ever met. The problem started about 3 months into our relationship. When I first introduced him to my family, my mom Kelly, 52F, and dad Arnold, 55M, were polite but clearly uncomfortable. They kept exchanging these looks whenever Bruce needed to maneuver his wheelchair, or when I helped him with something simple, like getting a drink from the high kitchen cabinet. After he left, they sat me down for a talk. My mom started by saying she was concerned about my future. She kept emphasizing how young I was and how I shouldn't tie myself down to someone who would need constant care. She even brought up her friend's daughter, who married a guy with a chronic illness and ended up divorcing him after 5 years because she couldn't handle being a caretaker. I tried explaining that Bruce was completely independent and that we'd already figured out how to handle any physical limitations, but she wouldn't listen. My dad's reaction was even more frustrating. He always being traditional in his views, thinking a man should be the protector and provider. He couldn't seem to understand that Bruce was actually more financially stable than me. He kept making comments about how I deserved someone who could give me a normal life, whatever that means. I thought they would come around once they got to know Bruce better, but it only got worse. Every family dinner became an ordeal. My sister Tamara, 30 Evhev, who I was extremely close to, growing up started acting weird too. She would deliberately plan family activities that would be difficult for Bruce to participate in, like hiking trips or beach outings, and then act surprised when I chose to spend time with him. Instead, my friends' reactions have been just as disappointing. My best friend Rachel, 20 who I've known since high school, was supportive at first, but started showing her true colors when things got serious. Between Bruce and me, when we moved in together 6 months ago, she staged what she called an intervention. She brought over wine and spent hours trying to convince me that I was making a mistake. She kept saying things like I was too young to become a caregiver and that I would regret giving up a normal life. The final straw came last week. Bruce and I had been talking about marriage, and we decided to get engaged. We were both so happy, and Bruce had even shown me their ring he had picked out before he could officially propose. I decided to tell my parents, thinking maybe the permanence of marriage would make them finally accept our relationship. I was wrong. My mom burst into tears, like I had announced I was dying. My dad started pacing the room, asking if I had lost my mind. They brought up everything from how we would handle intimacy, completely inappropriate and none of their business, to how our children might be affected by having a father in a wheelchair. We don't even want kids right now. They ended up calling my entire extended family, and suddenly I was getting calls and messages from aunts and uncles I'd barely talked to, all trying to tuck me out of ruining my life. Things escalated further when they invited us over for dinner last Sunday. Throughout the meal, they kept making these passive-aggressive comments. My mom asked Bruce if he felt guilty about holding me back from having a normal life. My dad spent the entire dinner talking about his friend's son, who's a personal trainer, going on and on about how athletic and capable he was. Bruce handled it all with grace, but I could see the hurt in his eyes after dinner. My parents pulled me aside and dropped another bomb. They had already signed me up for counseling sessions, claiming I had a savior complex. They had paid for 10 sessions with a therapist who supposedly specialized in helping people break free from toxic relationships. I was furious. The audacity of them making decisions about my mental health without my consent was shocking, but they weren't done the next day. I found out they had contacted Bruce's parents behind my back. They tried to convince them to talk Bruce out of marrying me, saying he was being selfish and ruining my life. Thank God, Bruce's parents are nothing like mine. They've been supportive of our relationship from day one and immediately told us about my parents' attempt to interfere. Bruce is no suggesting I take some time to think about what I'm getting into, not because he doubts our relationship, but because he hates seeing how much stress this is causing me. But I don't need time to think I know what I want. I want to be with him. He's the most caring, supportive, and loving partner I could ask for. Yes, there are some things we have to do differently, but we figured out what works for us. I feel like I'm being forced to choose between the man I love and my entire support system. My family has always been close-knit, and the thought of cutting them off terrifies me. But I can't stand watching them disrespect Bruce and our relationship any longer. Has anyone dealt with something similar? How do I make them understand that this is my choice and they need to respect it? Update 1, I honestly never thought things could get worse, but they did. After my last post, I spent some time trying to keep the peace with my family while still standing firm about my relationship with Bruce. I agreed to have lunch with my cousin Beth last weekend, thinking she might be more understanding since she had always been the reasonable one in the family. That lunch change, everything Beth seemed nervous throughout our meal, barely touching her food and checking her phone constantly. Finally, she broke down and told me she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She pulled out her phone and showed me something that made my blood run cold. A private Facebook group called Concerned for Katie, that's me. With over 30 members run by my own mother, the group had been active for months, right around the time Bruce and I moved in together. My mom was the admin, and the members included my sister Tamara Rachel, several of my other friends, some extended family members, and even a few of my mom's friends who I barely knew. They were all there discussing my relationship like it was some sort of crisis that needed intervention. I spent the entire night reading through. The post had screenshotted for me Rachel, who I thought was my best friend, had been one of the most active members. She had been keeping a detailed log of every single challenge or inconvenience she noticed in my relationship with Bruce. She wrote about how we had to leave her birthday dinner early because the restaurant's wheelchair ramp was broken. She mentioned the time Bruce needed my help reaching a book from the top shelf at Barnes & Noble. She even wrote about how I helped Bruce transfer from his wheelchair to the car when we went to the beach, describing it as proof that I was already turning into a caretaker. My sister Tamara had been sharing links to articles about failed relationships with disabled partners. She found forum posts from people who had divorced their disabled spouses, highlighting all the complaints and struggles they mentioned. She even started a thread asking for people to share similar stories. They knew of trying to build a case against my relationship. But the most shocking part was their plans for my upcoming birthday. They had been organizing what they called an intervention. My mom had found a woman named Sandra through some online support group. Sandra had divorced her husband 3 years after he became wheelchair-bound. Following an accident, they were planning to have her speak at my birthday party, along with several other people who had left relationships with disabled partners. They had an entire script planned out with each person, taking turns to share horror stories about how hard their lives had become. The details were meticulously planned. They were going to surprise meet what I thought would be my birthday dinner. Rachel had booked a private room at my favorite restaurant, claiming it was just for a small celebration. They'd even planned who would sit where with. Strategically placed far from me, soothers could get my attention. They had backup plans in case I tried to leave, including having my dad block the exit. When I confronted my mom about this, her response made me sick. She started crying, saying they were doing all this because they love me too much to watch me throw my life away. She actually tried to defend the Facebook group, saying it was a support group for people who cared about my well-being. When I asked her how she could do this to me, she said she was just being a good mother by trying to save me from making the biggest mistake. Of my life, my sister was even worse, she said. Finding all those divorce stories and negative experiences was proof of how much research she had done to help me understand what I was getting into. She acted like she deserved praise for putting so much effort into trying to break up my relationship. She even had the nerve to say that one day I would thank them for trying to stop me from ruining my life. Rachel still hasn't apologized when I called. Her ouch, she doubled down and said everything she wrote in the group was true. She said she'd been documenting those moments because she knew I was too blinded by love to see how hard my life had become. She actually said that watching me help Bruce with simple tasks made her heart break, like I was some sort of martyr sacrificing my life for him. It showed everything to Bruce last night. He was hurt, but not surprised. He told me he'd always sensed that my friends and family were just tolerating him, waiting for me to realize I was making a mistake. He admitted that he noticed how Rachel would watch us whenever he needed any help, but he had tried to ignore it. For me's sake, it breaks my heart that he had to deal with these people and their judgment. All this time, I still feel sick every time I think about all those people in that group, discussing my private life and planning ways to manipulate me. These were people I trusted, people who were supposed to be happy for me, finding someone who loves me. Instead, they were treating me like I was in some cult that needed saving. I've blocked most of them now, but I keep discovering new people who were involved in this scheme. It feels like my entire support system was fake. I showed everything to Bruce. He was hurt but not surprised. He told me he had always sensed that my friends and family were just tolerating him, waiting for me to come to my senses. It breaks my heart that he had to deal with this feeling. All along update to after discovering that Facebook group I needed space from, everyone involved. I blocked my family members on all social media platforms and told them I needed time to process everything. I moved all my stuff out of my parents' house, including my childhood belongings that I had been storing there. Bruce helped me find a storage unit for everything, and just having those physical items away from my parents' house made me feel a bit better. I thought things would quiet down during this break, but life had other plans last week. I got an unexpected call from James, Rachel's husband. He sounded nervous and said he needed to meet me in person to tell me something important. I was hesitant at first, thinking this might be another intervention attempt, but he insisted it wasn't and asked to meet at a coffee shop near my office. What James told me made my stomach turn. Apparently, the Facebook group wasn't just for venting and planning that birthday intervention. It was also being used to coordinate an elaborate plan to break up my relationship. Remember that co-worker of Thomas who she tried to set me up with? His name is Mike, and it turns out my mom had made a deal with him if he could successfully break up my relationship with Bruce. My dad would not only give him a job at his company, but also fast-track him to a management position. James showed me screenshots of private messages between Rachel and my mom discussing this plan. They had mapped out places I usually go, my favorite coffee shop, the grocery store I shop at, even the park where I sometimes take lunch breaks. The plan was for Mike to engineer casual run-ins at these locations. Rachel had even told him what coffee I usually order, so he could pretend to have the same taste the messages showed. They had been planning these accidental meetings for weeks. Mike was supposed to slowly build a friendship with me, show me how easy life could be with an able-bodied man, and make me question my relationship with Bruce. They had even planned scenarios where Mike would help me with things that required physical strength, trying to highlight what they saw as Bruce's limitations. But what really got to me was learning that Rachel had been recording our phone conversations all those times. I called her to vent about normal relationship stuff, like when Bruce and I disagreed about which apartment to rent, or when we had a small argument about holiday plans. She was recording everything they were planning to edit these recordings to use during their intervention, making it sound like I was unhappy in my relationship. James told me he found out about all this when he overheard Rachel on the phone with my mom discussing how to edit one of these recordings. He had been feeling guilty about keeping quiet and decided to tell me everything after seeing how upset I was about the Facebook group when I asked James why Rachel would go to such lengths. He revealed something else. Apparently, Rachel had confided in him that she was jealous of my relationship with Bruce. Despite his wheelchair, Bruce had a better job, made more money, and was more attentive than most able-bodied guys she knew. She couldn't understand how I had found such a great partner in someone she considered disabled while she was struggling in her own marriage. I sat there in that coffee shop feeling them. As James showed me more and more evidence of their manipulation, the level of betrayal was overwhelming. These weren't just people disapproving of my relationship, they were actively working to destroy it through calculated manipulative schemes. After meeting with James, I went straight to Bruce's office and told him everything. We spent hours talking about it, and he suggested that maybe we should consider moving to Seattle, where his company has another office. At first, I was resistant to the idea of leaving everything behind: my job, my friends, the few real ones I had left, the city I grew up in. But now, after learning about the extent of their manipulation, I'm seriously considering it. The level of manipulation and betrayal is overwhelming. These people weren't just disapproving of my relationship, they were actively trying to sabotage it. Bruce suggested that maybe we should move to another city where his company has an office. At first, I was resistant to the idea of leaving everything behind, but now I'm seriously considering it. Update 3. I'm writing this final update from our new apartment in Seattle, and for the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe again. The move happened faster than we expected. Bruce's company was incredibly supportive. They not only approved his transfer, but also helped with relocation costs. I was able to keep my job by switching to remote work. Though I had to take a small pay cut the weeks leading up to our move, where intense word got out about our plans. Somehow, probably through some distant relative, and suddenly everyone wanted to talk. My mom showed up at our old apartment unannounced 3 times. The first time she was crying and begging me to stay, promising she would attend family therapy and learn to accept Bruce. But second time she brought my dad, who tried to use his typical guilt tactics about how I was breaking my mother's heart. And the third time she came with Tamara, and they staged what they called their last attempt to save me from myself. I had to change my phone number twice because they kept getting my new number from distant relatives or old friends. They created new email accounts to contact me after I blocked their original ones. My mom even tried to reach out to Bruce's parents to get them to stop us from moving, but his parents firmly told her to leave us alone the day before we left. Rachel showed up at my workplace. She had this whole speech prepared about how she had realized she was wrong and how she wanted to make things right. But when I pressed her about the recorded phone calls and her involvement in the setup plan with Mike, she tried to justify it all again. She actually said she still believed she was doing the right thing, and that my moving across the country proved I knew deep down that my relationship with Bruce wasn't strong enough to survive close scrutiny. We didn't tell anyone our exact moving date. We hired movers who packed everything while we stayed at a hotel, and we took an early morning flight to avoid any dramatic airport scenes. Bruce's parents drove us to the airport at Fort-Moreau. And I'll never forget there, Leaf, I felt when the plane took off. Our new life in Seattle is different, but in a good way. We found an accessible apartment in a modern building downtown, close to Bruce's new office. The city itself is much more wheelchair-friendly than our hometown. There are proper ramps everywhere, automated doors, and people here don't stare or make comments like they did back home. My extended family members have been reaching out through LinkedIn and work email telling me I'm being immature by cutting off contact with my parents. Some of them are saying that moving across the country is an extreme reaction to what they still insist was just family showing concern. My aunt even tried to guilt me by mentioning that my mom has started taking anxiety medication because of this situation. But I'm done feeling guilty. Bruce and I are getting married next month in a small ceremony here in Seattle. His parents are flying in, along with his brother and sister-in-law. My side will be empty except for my cousin Beth, the one who warned me about the Facebook group, and her husband. It's not the wedding I dreamed of as a little girl, but it's perfect because I'm marrying the right person. Someone told me that the Facebook group is still active. Now focused on discussing how. I've been brainwashed by Bruce into abandoning my family. I don't care anymore. They can spend their time theorizing about my life while I'm actually living it, happy and free from their toxic influence. Maybe someday, my family will truly understand what they did wrong and offer a genuine apology. Maybe they'll realize that their actions went far beyond normal parental concern into emotional manipulation and abuse. But I'm not putting my life on hold waiting for that to happen. Bruce and I are building our own life, our own family, and our own happiness. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I feel absolutely certain that we made the right choice.